You've built a successful life, but now what? Welcome to the Gen X Collective podcast. We're for men who are navigating midlife with purpose, health, wealth, family, work, and the mark you've made on the world. We're talking about the stuff that really matters with experts who have solutions, advice, and a sense of humor. And now, here's our host, Laurent Truc.
Welcome to another episode of the Gen X Collective podcast, the space where high-performing Gen X men come to talk real life, real wealth, and real legacy. Today, we're digging into two topics that often get delayed until it's too late: estate planning and succession planning. Whether you're leading a business, you're managing your family's future, or somewhere in between, it's time to ask yourself, what happens after you? So I'm joined by Tony Salgado, founder of AMS Wealth, and one of Canada's top experts in helping individuals and entrepreneurs take control of their long-term plans. Tony's the guy you call when you want to preserve your wealth, minimize your risk, and ensure a smooth transition. So let's get into it. Tony, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, man. I'm excited.
I'm excited too. So many questions. Looking forward to diving in.
And I hope the listeners don't expect all the answers today.
We
can touch on a few things, definitely.
Perfect. Why don't we start with you? Can you give us a little bit of your background and how you got into this space?
Yeah, sure. I'm a tax accountant by training. So chartered accountant background and training. I articled with PwC, and that's kind of where I got the groundwork and the basic knowledge around how you can establish corporate tax structures, which seems to be a very normal thing that's required for a lot of wealthy people and business owners in particular. And so from there, it was just kind of jumping off point to understanding what does it all mean from not only looking at it from a tax perspective, but also a holistic perspective. So I'm a chartered accountant, I'm a certified financial planner, and a chartered life underwriter, all these acronyms. But basically what it means is that I have a pretty good, deep knowledge on tax and estate and succession plan. And starting off from a tax perspective and what happens to your stuff when you're gone, or what happens to your stuff when you can no longer control your own legacy. And that doesn't necessarily mean you're gone. That you could physically still be here, but you can't control your legacy. And I love the fact that you use that word right off the bat, is how do you control your stuff, whether it's a family business, your legacy, your wealth. And it's really the emphasis of control. And last year I was down in Miami. I had a great opportunity to speak in front of Sun Life Financial. There was a North American gathering, and they really pulled that out of me in terms of why do you do what you do? Yeah, there's tax and estate knowledge there. Great. We have an office in Markham. We offer tax and estate solutions using insurance, but that's the what and the how. But really, they forced me to think about the why, and that word, control, was the $1 million answer. I was born in Portugal, came to Canada with very little, and I saw what not having control of your financial life was all about. And so that became super ingrained in my core, and I loved having control of my own financial freedom, so why not impart that onto my clients?
Just so everybody has the same baseline and we're kicking off from the same definition of concept, can you define estate planning versus succession planning? What's the difference?
Yeah, so succession planning is the transition of financial and operational success from where it is today to tomorrow. Succession planning is a lot more all-encompassing, and how does a business operate without you? How do your stakeholders continue their relationships and their contracts? Because when you look at, and in particular, succession planning is focused on family-run businesses and all the stakeholders involved. These are suppliers, employees, clients. How does it all transition without you here? And we've worked with so many different families where I find it very neat and interesting about Do you have the right family members at the table to implement a succession plan? Or do you need to hire management for that succession plan? Estate planning is typically focused on the groundwork of wills, powers of attorney, and really emphasizing tax minimization on death. So from a financial lens, how do all these things connect? What's the difference between joint tenancy and tenants in common? Right? Very simple forms of ownership of real estate. Well, it's a huge impact on your estate.
So you bring up a good point. When I talk to Gen X men, I mean, we're in that phase of life where you use the word control, and we're slowly losing control. I find in some aspects, right? Health issues are coming up. We're seeing aging parents. Our kids are empty nesting. They're leaving, and they're causing chaos in our lives with some of the mistakes they're making. And so, I think that control is a very big thing. And family is obviously at the core of this estate planning and succession planning. You talk a little bit about how do you involve the next generation in the conversation? Like, do you have some best practices? How does that work?
You're right. It really depends family to family. It depends on the communication between everyone. We recently met with a family that we laid out a succession plan for the family business. Very neat. They had a part of the business that was real estate focused and a part of the business that was operational focused. Okay. And they happened to have a good setup in the sense that they had a son that wanted to manage the real estate and a daughter who happened to want to manage the operation. How many times does that happen, right? So it happens to be that's one of our latest clients. And so that was a very easy conversation to involve the kids in when we talked about, here's the tax and estate legal framework. Here's the operational success. Are you involved with supply chain? Are you involved with the tenants? And getting them up to speed where if mom and dad are not around or not in control of their own capacity, you can step right in and take it over.
So let's kind of divide the two. Let's start maybe with estate planning. So what are some of the things that people should consider in general estate planning?
I want people to take one thing away from this call, definitely. And that one thing is a will is not an estate plan. And so please stop thinking that you've done a will and you've done your estate plan. That could not be further from the truth. So it's like, we're building a home. I got a bricklayer to lay bricks, but we got no windows. So, you have a will, which is good, and hopefully it's updated, but that's only one piece of the overall puzzle. Unfortunately, in the Canadian space, we're very siloed in service offering. So what I find is a lot of wealthy family-owned business and executives go to their lawyer to do their will. Mm-hmm. Then in 3 months, they go to their financial planner to review their beneficiary designations. Then in 3 months, they think about using insurance for tax planning. And it's just not integrated. Mm-hmm. Don't be afraid to bring people together, because an estate plan is an overview of your net worth, overview of your assets and liabilities, and how to protect your wealth and control the distribution of that according to your wishes. Again, emphasis on control. Control what you can. We can't control some stuff that just comes along in life, man. You can't handle some things that just control the controllables. So the variables you can manage them to the best of your ability. And so an estate plan, when we're looking at your overall net worth, your assets and your liabilities, how are you going to control the distribution of your estate plan while minimizing tax as best as possible?
And I would assume if you're doing it with disparate individuals, like it's not cohesive, you're going to miss something.
You got it.
And then the tax man's there to collect on your mistake.
Yeah, it's so unbelievable how highly taxed of a community we are.
Yeah.
We're recording this in Ontario, and most people know you're at 54% at the highest personal tax rate, 53.5 and change. So, and not only is it a problem, there was a whole study done in the US years ago about at what point is there diminishing returns of like marginal tax rates in a society? And it's a famous Laffer curve. So anyone can Google this. It's called LASFER. It's an economist study. And this economist was hired by the US administration like 50 years ago. And his whole study was to say, what is the ideal optimal tax in society where we maximize government revenue? Basically, that's what it was. And his study found that the rate is 50%, which tells us that anything above and beyond 50 motivates bad behavior when we want to maximize government revenue. Pretty simple. So if I feel that for every additional dollar, I'm giving up 51 and keeping 49, I'm all of a sudden motivated to do something that's probably not so on board. And that can be in a few things. That could be departure from Canada. So maybe I want to leave Canada because this is just too much. Yeah. Or maybe I don't want to report that income anymore or work so hard because I feel like I'm giving up more than my fair share. So while living, we have this problem where we're not motivating good behavior. And the income threshold at which we hit that high rate is super low. Yeah. Right? So it's not like the United States. In the United States, our neighbors, by the time you hit the highest marginal rate, you're making $500,000 or more. Here in Ontario, you're at less than half of that. Yeah. So the income threshold is so low to hit such a high rate. And that problem becomes super expanded upon death. And so upon death, if you own private company shares, you could technically be triple taxed on death if you don't have the right group of advisors around you. There is technically an opportunity for the government to tax anyone with private company shares above 70% of your wealth if you have no proper plan in place.
Wow.
So if you give up 70% or more of what you've built, doesn't sound like you're controlling much.
Yeah. And you're getting taxed along the way at a very high rate. So you've said the word insurance a couple of times. What are some of the tools out there that you use to create a plan, a succession plan? Like what do people need to think about?
The education around the term insurance, people that have not looked into it in the past, they typically associate, unfortunately, insurance with a cost. They think about car insurance, which is not what we're talking about, right? We're talking about using an asset class, using an investment mix. And when we look at the ultra high net worth individuals across the globe, a large percentage of their wealth, they're not looking for our advice to multiply their net worth. That's not what our job is. We're not here to say you're going to take 20 million net worth and we're going to make it 60 or 100. No. The point of the exercise is to preserve what's there. And so how do you preserve what's there? And insurance is basically a fixed asset class that you can invest in and utilize during your lifetime while leaving a tax-free distribution behind. So oftentimes we use insurance to match the tax owing on death with the investment into the insurance. Okay. Simple math. If we have someone that has a $10 million net worth and they owe $3 million of tax when they pass away, we build a portfolio to match that $3 million liability so that the cash comes out exactly when you need it. And when do you need it? You need it when you pass away because there's a deemed disposition in Canada. The one main exception is when you leave property between spouses. So there's a deferral of tax when spouses leave things to each other. By the way, this also happens upon your life. You can defer assets to each other while you're alive. And you can also do that when you pass away. But once you look at succession to the next generation, that's when tax hits. And so on that what's called a deemed disposition, and why that's a big problem, tax in itself can be a big problem for a few reasons. But this in particular is a big problem because you haven't sold anything.
Yeah.
So you have a cash liability without selling anything. All you've done is passed away. So start thinking about that and you're like, well, I own $20 million of real estate, $50 million of real estate. I pass away.
Yep.
I don't sell anything, but I have to pay taxes on it. Where is that money coming from? And by the way, if you try to leave Canada, so you don't die in Canada, we have the same rules that apply when you pass away in Canada to when you leave Canada.
Okay.
So
it's just earlier.
Yeah, it's just depending on your life expectancy, you can't get away from it, is what I'm trying to say, right? And so you're going to get taxed, and the last chance that the government has an opportunity to tax you is either when you become deceased or when you choose to leave the country.
Are there other tools? So there's insurance, there's a will, anything else that's part of this ecosystem to consider?
Review your ownership structures and beneficiary designations. Everything you own, look at where does it get distributed to when you pass away. So on certain assets, you can name a beneficiary. So if you think about a TFSA, an RRSP, on those contracts, you can say, this is who I want it to go to. Mm-hmm. On other ownership assets, think about personally owning a condo. And so if you personally own this piece of real estate, then first question is, do you own it in conjunction with anyone else?
Right.
Second question is the legal form of that ownership. Is it a joint tenancy or is it a tenants in common? So for example, you and I, we can like each other and we can co-invest with each other. Mm-hmm. But I'm certainly speaking for myself, but probably also for you. I would want to own something with you, but if something happens to me, I would want my share to go to my family as you would want your share to go to your family, not to me.
Yep.
Right? And so these are the type of things that you have to review. And the way to do this is to have an itemized list of assets and liability, have an idea of who do you want to bequeath, or another word for that would be who do you want to leave stuff to? Mm-hmm. And how does it get there in the most tax efficient way? So we're talking about things like a will, forms of ownership, beneficiary designations, and whether or not trusts make sense. A trust can be a great vehicle to own things with, but understand that every time we add complexity, we add cost. And anytime we add cost, we need to make sure that it's a good ROI for the purpose that we are building it to.
Do you have a rule of thumb around complexity versus cost? So if your net worth is under 5 million, trust isn't even a consideration. Like how do you kind of think through that?
I mean, that would be an easy one, right? So if you have someone under 5 million, there probably isn't a huge need for a living trust. So here we should probably pause for a second and distinguish trusts. So yes. in Canada, there are two basic forms of trust. There's a whole bunch of acronyms for all of them, but it really comes down to two forms of trusts. You can set up a trust while you're alive. So this is, in Latin, it would be an inter vivos trust. You know, you set something up while you're alive, and this trust that you set up while you're alive owns some stuff. Or you can set up a trust through your will, which would be a testamentary trust. And so you can set up a trust while you're alive. You could set up a trust for when you pass away. The more simple example of when you set up a trust for when you pass away, think about if you were to pass away with minor kids or with kids that are not of a certain age. You might want to protect that inheritance before they start buying 3 or 4 Ferraris, and now the wealth is completely gone. So you may want to consider setting up a trust, a testamentary trust in your will to protect And guess what? The word we're going to come back to: control.
Control. It's either control or insurance.
Yeah, it's control. It's control. To control your estate, right? When you leave something behind and it doesn't necessarily need to be only based on the person's age, but let's assume it's a young person that could be a bit more of a spendthrift.
Yeah.
And you want to control that distribution to them. So that's why you would use a trust there. While you're alive, you may want to use a trust for multiple reasons. That can include tax planning, so capital gains exemption planning, or even probate planning. We've talked a little bit about having private company shares and passing away, and there's an opportunity to be triple taxed on death, which sounds crazy, but it's a reality. But we even haven't talked about probate fees. And probate fees are in addition to terminal tax liability. So very simple example. Recently, we met with a client. They had $10 million of investments.
Okay.
So $10 million of investments, the probate fee in Canada would be $150,000.
Wow.
It's 1.5% of whatever you personally own.
Okay.
So quick math, 1.5% on 10 million is 150 grand.
Mm-hmm.
We do an ROI calculation for the client. How much does it take to set up a trust? Call it 5 to 10 grand. How much does it cost to maintain? Couple grand a year. So to save 150,000, if your total input cost is, let's say, 50,000.
Yeah. It's a no-brainer.
I would think so, right? So
yeah.
That's basically, we do that kind of analysis and scenario for the people we work with.
Is trust really around the probate piece? Are there other things that it simplifies in terms of asset reallocation, things like that?
It does, yeah.
Okay.
So you could use a trust to protect your estate from fees of probate. Mm-hmm. You could also use your living trust for privacy reasons.
Okay.
So in Ontario, your public will, your will becomes public. And so anyone that wants to look at your distribution of your primary will, we can go to the court system, and you and I can finish this podcast right now, and we can go get somebody's will. We can ask for it and see how it was distributed, right?
I did not know that. That's crazy.
We're not going to do that today, but we can go and get access to these things. And so a trust, a private trust that you can set up while you're alive, also adds a lot of privacy. And so those assets that can be distributed to those people does not become part of your will.
What's the benefit of a will in the end? If you're going to go through the process of getting down to a trust, hiding some of this stuff, is a will just really a directive of what has to happen when you pass away and who's in charge? Is that really the limitation? My accounting background was always going to say it depends on the fact pattern. So it really depends, but a will can be as simple as what you just suggested. It could just be a directive of guardianship. Like if you have minor kids, who's taking care of my kids? How do you want to be buried? Do you want to have any provisions on how you want to be buried? We've met clients that have put a clause in for people not to be allowed to their burial. There were people named that should not attend that ceremony. So you have this will with directives of how you want your, not only financial affairs, but how you want to be also taken care of during that time. You could set so much ownership up inside a trust that ultimately a will would dictate very little of your ownership, but it really depends on your structure. Just on the estate planning, if you have property outside of Canada, how is that treated?
You think it's complicated just with property in Canada. Add in a layer of a property outside of Canada, and it's a whole other bottle of wax. So let's start with, as a Canadian resident, you're taxed on worldwide income.
Okay.
And you're also taxed on death with your worldwide estate. Okay. So most popular is Florida properties, or although I don't know, with all the tariff talk, maybe this conversation is going to change in a few months, but
Yeah.
we have a lot of clients that have property in Florida and Arizona. And so we have to consider, first and foremost, do you have wills or powers of attorney outside of Canada to manage with those properties? Do you need them? So every jurisdiction is going to be different. Even within the United States, we cannot say a blanket statement that no matter where you own property in the United States, this is the approach. That's not true.
Okay.
So every state would be different in the US. And then you consider people with ownership in Europe and all over the world. Based on the area of where you own things will dictate whether or not you would need a Florida power of attorney, a Florida will. What's your tax exposure, not only in Canada when you pass away, but in that jurisdiction?
And then Canada still gets its piece, though.
Correct.
All right. I've got a bunch of questions on succession planning. Anything else we didn't talk about in estate planning that you suggest we touch on?
Overall, I think people shouldn't be afraid to talk about it.
Okay.
Depending on cultures and depending on how you form an opinion and your awareness around it, you know, some people are like, no, I don't want to talk about estate planning. That means I'm going to die. And I haven't yet met anyone that has solved that problem without not dying. So it's going to happen. It's just a matter of control what you can. And if you've worked so hard to build something, I would imagine that you would want to control that distribution as well.
Yeah.
Why the heck work so hard and put in the blood, sweat, and tears for it to be just taken away when you're no longer here just because you don't want to talk about that topic? It really is nonsensical. It's you might as well just shut off today and cruise. Because I think the damage that can be done to a family estate is more significant and severe than most people realize.
Yeah.
If you live in the GTA, it can take years to probate your estate. If you live in the GTA, your significant tax liability on death is a serious drain of your wealth if you don't have the liquidity there for that part.
I do know of people where tax planning was not a part of the conversation pre-death, and their kids had a very hard time forcing sales of homes in order to, get enough cash to pay for these things. And obviously there's a financial impact, but the emotional impact was tremendous. Like, they're already dealing with the death, and then for 2 years they're stuck in probate. There's interfighting, there's all this stuff. So it's not an easy conversation, but it's an important one.
Yeah, but no, it's surprising how many people don't have a story like that, or how many people haven't seen that. We had one family come to our office. They were having dinner with their family. Someone mentioned, go talk to Tony about your estate planning. And the reason why this came up is because they were so upset that they had $300,000 of probate fees to pay after dad passed away. So this was a family who immigrated from Greece, bought a bunch of real estate in the GTA. Dad owned everything individually. So he didn't co-own things with his spouse. He didn't put anything in a trust. He passes away. The family's all upset because they haven't sold anything. There's a personal element. There's a financial element. And their lawyer tells them they got to come up with $300,000. And they come to see me. And I said, well, yes, that's definitely a problem. But has anyone talked to you about a $5 million problem that's coming after mom passes?
Oh, wow.
If you think you're upset about $300,000, how do you feel about $5 million when mom passes? And it's just, how do you deliver that message in a way that's soft, educational, and make the choice based on the information you have available to you. We're not pulling numbers out of the air. This simple math, value, cost basis, tax rate, that's the number, right?
And there's nothing you can do once somebody passes. Like, that clock's done.
It's unfortunate because what I find, there's a huge divide. When we talk about, like, I know you have economists on, but I love understanding economy, right? So I believe that, I'm not an economist, but I believe that we're going to have a larger and larger divide in Canada where that middle class, if it's not already gone, it's going to be gone soon.
Yeah.
And so you have people that have wealth and can control it. And that people with wealth, if they follow proper prudent planning, they'll be able to control that and pass that on. And so same idea when it comes to estate, when you think about leaving your inheritance behind. I have met a group of people that have the education, the knowledge base of, oh yeah, this has been family legacy after family legacy. My parents did this, my grandparents did this. And so when I get in the room and we start educating people around estate planning, around insurance planning, about tax planning, and in that cohort of group of people, the details for them don't really seem to hit home the same way because they've seen it. They've seen grandparents and parents do the exact same thing. The cohort that immigrated first generation wealth or that created wealth for themselves walk into the same room, same number, right? 100 million, 100 million, right? It doesn't, the number is the same, but how they got there was so different. And so now we're educating this group of people that their grandparents didn't do this, their parents didn't do this. The hill to climb on the education is much higher, but it's also much more gratifying when you get that first generational wealth person to understand why we need to do something that you haven't thought of before.
Well, by the time they're done, they have complete clarity on what is left for their children. Unburdened, untaxed, like you've created a real nest egg for them to start living or continue living their lives with a nice pile that you created for them, which is great.
Yeah, and ultimately what you leave behind can only go to 3 different places. And those 3 different places are government coffers, beneficiaries, the people you select, or charity. And no matter no matter how you've built your wealth, no matter how wealthy you are, those are the 3 categories you're going to leave stuff behind to. Might as well pick the people or the organizations that are going to get it.
And I assume the answer to this is as soon as possible. But is there a time frame in life where you should start really focusing and putting a strategy in place?
As soon as possible. But I think I've always said every year around tax time is a great time.
Okay.
Because you're filing your tax returns. Stop for 1 second and think about what you're paying in tax, why you're paying that in tax. And it's a perfect opportunity to think about holistically, does this still meet my objectives? I'm not saying you have to redo a will every year or redo your estate plan every year. No. But every year around tax time, take 5 minutes. Does this still meet my objectives? Yeah. In the last year, was there a new birth or a death or a marriage that could impact how I want my stuff distributed going forward?
Let's pivot real quick on succession planning. So business owners, I mean, these are major decisions for them in terms of tax liability, continuity in their business, and seeing their business continue beyond them in the right hands. Where do you start with that? Business owner comes in, knocks on your door and says, what do I do? Where does the conversation begin?
Well, so are we going to keep or sell?
Okay.
So that's start there. Are we going to sell this thing while you're around? Or do you want to pass this on to someone? And if you want to pass this on to someone, do you want to pass this on to your kids or to a group of employees? And how do you structure that from a tax perspective follows that? So depending on what somebody says, and we recently had someone come in, they were property management business. Okay. And so they have an idea to sell this business in the next 5 years. And how do we, if that's the intention, then are you properly structured from a tax perspective and from an operations perspective to make this a sellable asset and maximize your value? And the tax estate structure needs to follow the primary intention.
Okay.
Versus if the primary intention is to leave the business to a child, then we follow down a different path in order to structure that. What we've been finding, which is I find interesting, is we have recently been talking to business owners that have a clear intention that one child of many will take over ownership and active management. So the logical question becomes, if you have 3 kids and one of them takes over the crown jewel, what do the other 2 get? And how do you make that fair treatment amongst all 3 kids? And we have a lot of conversations around that as well. And if we're going to have pockets of cash or liquidity, so a very simple example, mom and dad run a farm. If mom and dad run a farm and Johnny wants the farm and Sally wants nothing to do with the farm, I could tell you that 99% of the chance, Ontario business owners have a lot of their wealth tied up in their family business.
Yeah.
So it's not like there's a $50 million family business and a $15 million pool of cash.
Yeah.
Right? It just traditionally doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
So you have the crown jewel, and then you have things on this side.
A house, maybe.
Yeah.
A couple other things, yeah.
A couple of vintage cars, a couple of houses. But typically, it's nothing close to what the value is of the crown jewel.
Yep.
So how do we create value? How do we use insurance? Could be used in this case as an equalization technique to create this fairness of distribution, where if a crown jewel of a family business goes to Johnny, okay, we'll have an immediate buyout of Sally so she could actually get her fair share of inheritance.
Very interesting. I'm sure you've seen horror stories of conflict at the kid level. Okay.
All the time.
And is that something you prepare parents for? Like, look, there's going to be some difficult conversations you need to have with your kids, and like, how do you coach a parent?
I've always found that to be the toughest part of the job, because I went to school to become tax, finance, accounting, insurance, right? I didn't go to school to become a psychology, right? Like, I try my best, and I educate, and I warn of things coming down the pipeline. There are other experts that are a little bit more well-versed with sensitivity and emotional conversations around this. Once we lay down the framework of here are the financial impacts, we have to communicate this to the family. And sometimes it could be beneficial to have a mediator in the room, or someone that has a little bit more finesse around the emotional conversations. So we always bring that up to clients. Some clients choose to take that, some choose not to. But it's all about information. How can you make the decision with this information I'm giving?
What you're seeing right now today, most business owners are keeping their business for their kids, or are most trying to sell?
It's a pretty mixed bag.
Okay.
Yeah, so we deal with probably 50-50 in my business.
Okay.
But that could not be the trend across Canada. It's just what I'm seeing.
Okay.
If you are going to keep the family business in the family, the ownership and management doesn't necessarily need to be the same, right? So there's this really popular pie chart of where the intricacies are between family, ownership, and management. And you could be family and not be management, not be owner, or you could be owner and family and not management. So, and there's a prominent family we're working with around all this, and it's, where do you see the family members fitting in this chart? where they might not be involved in active management day to day, but they would love to own a piece of this asset so they can collect their coupon and their dividend for the rest of their life.
Sure.
And is there anything wrong with that? And for certain families, that could work. You could be an owner and family, but be completely removed from the day-to-day management because you know you're not helping.
An operator, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you approach succession planning differently if a seller isn't really sure that they have people in the family that can take over and operate versus, so if somebody is unknown, whether they prefer to sell or whether they prefer to keep it in the business, but they do want to start putting some succession planning together and some, whether it's an insurance policy to make sure it's fair for the kids and all that, like how do you go through that? Or are you really pushing the owner to start making decisions potentially earlier than they're ready for?
When they come to see us, that means that they've thought about it a bit. And so by the time they come to see us, we do want them to make a decision before it's too late. So we encourage decision making. We arm you with education and we say, let's talk again in a month. And put your son or put your daughter in that position that you think that they can take on and see if they can take it off, right? Yeah. Give them that role and that responsibility. See what happens for a month or two while you're still around, right? But removing yourself, so you're telling a founder and an owner to remove themselves, give up a little bit of control, right? Give up a little bit of control so that you don't lose control of the whole pie.
Yeah.
And let them step into those shoes for a month or two, see what happens, and then let's revisit this conversation. Definitely in those situations, we need that identified family member in the room sooner rather than later to see if they don't want it.
Sure.
We have a situation where dad and mom want the son to take over. They think he's capable. In meetings with us, he's shown he has capability, but he has no interest. And he says, "This is not what I want to do."
Yeah.
And it's like, and you can't force someone to do that. And he says, if my parents want to treat me fairly, that's great. I would love to own a piece of this, but I should not be part of management. I don't want to be part of operations, and I don't want to make those decisions. So not only identifying the right succession, but talking and asking the successor, do you want this?
Makes total sense. So Tony, just to for listeners right now who have taken all this in, what are kind of the next couple of steps that they should think through? Like give just a quick checklist of, hey, I'm 50, 55 years old. I may own a business. I definitely have some assets. Where do I start?
Write down, have a copy of your net worth.
Okay.
It's amazing how many people don't. And so basically, write down a list of assets and a list of liabilities, and that's your net worth. And with an approximate values, right? You need to start somewhere. This is a bit of an art and a science. It's your business might be worth 10, 10.1, 10.5. Write down 10 to start with. And then write down the people that are important to you that you may want to help along the way. You might be surprised that you might actually write down the name of a key employee that's helped you for 25 years.
That's a great point. Yeah.
And then meet with an advisor, whether it's your accountant, whether it's somebody like myself, to start the conversation around starting an estate plan.
Okay. And how long is that process usually when they work with you to build an estate plan? Is that a meeting? Is that...
No. It could be, if it was one meeting, then I would be, no, it's a process. It takes time. Even when we start working, on average, 3 to 6 months.
Okay.
So 3 to 6 months in terms of what do you want to achieve? What do you want to accomplish? What do you want to control? What do you want to protect? And after meeting with us, your lawyer, your accountant, and your advisors, you're starting to think, okay, here's the one, and address one thing at a time. So I'm a big fan of doing one thing at a time, slow and steady. If you try to address all these different variables all at once, you're never going to get to anything.
When you say one thing at a time, like the business or...
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, got it.
The business, the wealth, the foreign property, Let's think about it holistically and then tackle one item at a time.
Got it.
And so if you've identified, hey, my tax on death is my biggest priority because I just found out I have a $10 million tax problem and I don't have cash for that.
Yep.
Okay, let's go solve that. Versus I have property in Europe, it's worth $10 million. I don't have a European will. Let's start that.
And then revisiting depends on, as you said, life changes, new births, divorces, things like that. But other than that, is there a periodic, hey,
3 to 5 years.
3 to 5 years, just up the numbers, make sure everything is right on paper. Okay.
Yeah.
All
so
right.
this became very popular, the revisiting topic, when no longer going to be the case now, but when the capital gains inclusion rate was going to go up. People did a lot of their planning on the premise of, oh, we have a 25% tax on death.
Yep.
Now all of a sudden it's 36. And so if we built a solution for 25% liquidity, now we need a solution for 36% liquidity. And so all of a sudden everyone picked up their papers and let's revisit this to make sure we have the right liquidity. That's one example.
Yes, government always adds an element to this.
Well, yeah, it's fluid, as we would say.
Very cool. Perfect. Anything else you want to leave our listeners with at this point?
Don't be afraid to ask questions.
Okay.
And get the education you need, and always look at, and people listening in, they know how to measure ROI. It's a simple ROI exercise, whether we're looking at costs of setting up trusts, costs of doing primary and secondary wills. We didn't get a chance to talk about secondary wills, costs of insurance strategies, ROI on that. Look at all the ROIs and see if it makes sense. These are all tools that you could use to, guess what? Control your wealth and your health.
Tony, this has been great. How do people get in contact with you if they need to follow up?
amswealth.ca. That would be our website. And they can always email me at info@amswealth.ca.
Perfect. We'll put that in the notes. Tony, this was great. We'd love to have you on again down the road because there's so much more information that I'm sure we can dive into and detailed examples. But really appreciate the time and the advice. This was fantastic.
Thanks for having me on.
All right. Thanks so much, Tony.